Welcome back, Scott.
Morning.
So let's roll with these videos. We've done quite a few of them, and I think it's a good kind of time to set up an imaginary scenario, which essentially is something actually you've done. Not going to mention any names and whatnot, but go through an actual process of getting from one point to another. What would you do? How would you assess? And we see kind of there is a new category in bodybuilding shows or whatever you want to name them now, because
Yeah.
which is how do they call them? Muscle fitness or
Uh, Fitness model.
fitness model. Basically, what used to be toned figure at the dawn of times until everyone started to abuse drugs, and now the toned figure turned into mini bodybuilders. And now they decided, let's bring back a category that doesn't require drugs. Let's see how long that's going to last. But essentially, what what do you think that actually is? What are requirements? Have you dwelled into it? What are requirements for the category?
So they've advertised IFBB and then NPC, and then in Canada the CPA. They've advertised their criteria or the requirements for the category. It's essentially bikini. When bikini first started, they're actually using one of the bikini Olympia champions' original beginning pictures of her physique when bikini first started coming out to show what they want this new category to look like.
Is it far-fetched to think that it's basically something that's realistic to achieve rather than something that you need to dedicate your 24/7 for good amount of years to even look remotely like we see Instagram models looking like? Is this something that people can achieve and maintain throughout the year? That's what I'm asking.
So the way that it's being described, there's going to be quite a few females that are just naturally thin enough or lean enough that will do well in this category as they're describing it today before the season started, before they've judged the show. Because that's how bikini was. That's what a lot of the quote unquote hardcore bodybuilding type people hated the introduction of these new categories like men's physique and bikini. It just was looked down upon because essentially you could just be very lean and do well. You didn't have to have a lot of muscular development, etc. So this category is essentially doing that again, but it's just going to be like all the other categories. The original Miss Olympia bodybuilder looks like a Victoria's, like a swimsuit model of the 80s. Now, the Miss Olympia bodybuilders like Iris Kyle and them, they look like mass monster female bodybuilders. So the categories have just evolved because of drug use. And this will be no different. The bikini category that has been around now for whatever, a decade, whatever it's been, those girls are very muscular, very lean, and they are not sustaining that physique all year round without drug use. They're probably not sustaining that physique all year round, even with drug use, but they would need hormonal support to do that. And they're not achieving a successful physique on stage in bikini without drugs. So, from a business point of view, IFBB has introduced this new category, which now opens up a whole new demographic of females that can come in and compete. And what will end up happening is it'll evolve like the rest of the categories did. The girls in the current bikini category that are not quite muscular enough to do well at bikini will just go down to this new category and do well. But guess what? Those girls were probably already dabbling in some PEDs, maybe a lot of them. And so they're already going to be using some of these. So it's only going to be a matter of a few years until this category becomes a little bit more muscular, a little bit more muscular, a little bit more muscular, and all of a sudden, all the categories evolved from drug use because at the end of the day, the winners use drugs. And if they're going to defend their title, they're going to have to keep using drugs. And as you continue to be exposed to drugs, you continue to grow. So you're just going to evolve. And so this category theoretically, currently, is something that could be sustainable from a healthy lifestyle perspective, but it's not going to last. It's just going to evolve because as soon as they start determining the winners of the shows and these girls are slightly more muscular, the people that want to do well will take a bit of an advantage. Okay, let me try clenbuterol or maybe just like some female IFB pros are touting like just a little bit of 2.5 milligrams of Anavar a day or some fucking shit like that. So let's try a little bit and dabble a little bit. And that's Pandora's box. As soon as you start to dabble, you need more and then more and then more. So I give it a few years and that category will be quite a bit more muscular than it is now. And I'm waiting for the next male category to come in as well, which will be like, I don't know, male fitness model or Ken and Barbie. I don't know. Because it's the same thing like men's physique. I created a men's physique pro, well, quite a few of them, but a men's physique pro maybe 7 years ago. His stage weight, winning his pro card and placing top three in many pro shows, winning one pro show, was 192 pounds. The guy was 6'1". Those guys now are 250 pounds. So that's how much has evolved. So there's a lot of men that don't want to be 250 pounds. They want to be 210. So they'll
See,
just create that category because they want the money.
yeah,
From a business point of view,
let's
it
be
makes
honest.
sense.
To be that big, it takes a lot of work. It's I always laugh when people go like, "I don't want to be bodybuilder. I want to be classic. I'm like a C bum." I'm like, "Dude, it's 120 kilos. What are you talking about?
Yeah, a C
Dude,
bum. Yeah,
dude
I
is
want to be a C
larger
bum.
than
He's
a
a freaking
house."
unicorn. Right, right. Yeah, they don't understand how big these people are, how many calories they're eating, how much drugs they're taking. It's just that's the nature of this sport, you know.
And
So
I don't even think that's the most important part. The most important part that makes a difference is commitment to doing that all the
yeah,
time, which not many can do. You know, like, well,
no,
how old is Sebum? He's like, what, 30 maybe? Is he 30?
I
I
don't
don't
know.
even
I have no
know. But
idea.
he's retired now
Yeah,
because he just can't maintain that lifestyle because it takes away from everything you do. And he's
right,
supposed to
right.
be in that healthy category, but it's like there's no difference. It's just the amount of muscle you have.
Right. And I don't know him, but he's seemingly smart enough to know that enough's enough. He's gonna get out on top. And realistically, if he continued to come in at his conditioning, there was no one going to beat him because genetic wise, you can't train the genetics that that guy had. Like his muscle origins, insertions, everything. That was just his genetic gift. His work ethic was top notch, clearly. But there's a lot of guys that have top notch work ethic but they'll never be able to do that because they just don't have the genetics. So him realizing that and getting out is impressive. And then hopefully he was, wise with all the money he made and he's good, happy,
I
and
would
content.
not be surprised if he comes back in a few years because I know personally somebody who's looking after his like a structural like refurbishment, so to speak, like making sure his joints are healthier than they are now. I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of years after he had a rest, he comes back, to be honest, and his kid gets older. He's still very young.
Yeah, yep. And maybe,
Anyway, let's get back to this because I'm taking you away completely.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we got these chicks and whatnot. So when they want to get super lean and all those kind of things, a lot of women want to get beach ready, beach body ready. They want to look like that all year round. First of all, what are the body fat percentage numbers we are talking about?
So it's going to depend on the eye of the beholder in a sense. But if you're a female and you're 20% or less,
So give me
you're
a visual description what 20% looks like.
I would say if you look at any sort of, pop singer, celebrity, sex icon type of person, they're going to be flirting with low 20s to high teen body fat percentage just sort of naturally,
So
whatever they're using.
let me see if I get it right. So that would be somebody with not too much muscle definition, but definitely you can tell that they are not holding any excessive body fat. There is not like little stomach hanging or something like that.
Right.
So essentially what you're describing now at around 20% is what majority of women, when you speak to them, would actually want to look like.
Yes. If you took females as a globally outside of the fitness demographic, that swimsuit model, Sports Illustrated swimsuit model, whatever, that sort of physique would be a lot of them what they would think is their maybe it's not their goal, but they would think that's what they're thinking of when they think of bikini and leanness. And those girls are going to be high teens, low 20s, give or take. It's not a lot of muscle. It's just a fit, like a fit female, someone that exercises relatively regularly, has a healthy lifestyle, and carries a healthy level of body fat.
So what I want you to do now is imagine a girl. She's looking great in a bikini. Now she wants that physiques that you see predominantly on Instagram and whatnot, where they have this nice tie-in. You can separate glutes and hamstring. You can start understanding where muscles are. So you are, what I'm understanding is you're saying that's probably around 15, 16% body fat. So how do you get from 20 down to that? What would be your process about assessing if somebody is actually healthy enough to do that? And what would be the step-by-step stuff that you would suggest somebody to look into? Hey, how do you look at nutrition? How do you look at, I don't know, health markers? Or what would you suggest somebody who's already in fairly good shape, who wants to have that, little bit of muscle definition, so to speak? How do they get there? What do they need to have in place physiologically, maybe psychologically as well, to actually get there? And later on, maybe how realistic is it to hold on to it for longer than just one summer season?
Um, so right off the bat, then an initial assessment would include their lifestyle, their stress levels, their support system, blood markers, like health markers, just to ensure that everything is fine. If they're still in their reproductive years, they have a regular menstrual cycle, like the common things that you would look for are just general overall health. And I would be using a set of, questions about what does their job look like, their life, their day-to-day routines, etc., and then blood work. So assuming those things are fine. Um,
What
and
would
I
be
have seen
lifestyles that is deemed as fine for you? What do you mean exactly by that? Is it a shift?
um,
Is it a pattern work? Is it how much freedom do they need to do to dedicate themselves to do just this?
I would more or less base it on their day-to-day stress levels, and their time management skills. And something I think is underrated is their sleep, either the duration of or the quality of it. But you can't really get too picky right out of the gates with somebody's lifestyle, because they're not going to possibly open up with a lot of things. They're going to answer some vague questions like how many hours of sleep do you get? What's your blood pressure? What's your resting heart rate? What's your stress levels? How's life? Blah blah blah. And then you have to kind of just, I mean, I go by their responses to initiate the protocols that I design. And then from there, I go by the results of the protocols that kind of dictate or direct me on how to make adjustments. Because sometimes you'll realize they're not telling you the truth about certain things. But in order to kind of drop a case study, we have to just assume, okay, we've got an 18% body fat female at 127 pounds, I think was the example I was asked. So assuming all those things checked out, and this is a person that fits the criteria that we can actively pursue your goal of getting from 18% to 15%, or from 20 to 17, whatever it is, essentially you're dropping 3 or 4%. Then from there, it's just going to be a matter of, the first thing I'd want to know is, how did you come up with that body fat percentage? Is that realistic or not? Because the way I do things is I dictate caloric needs based on that lean body mass. So if somebody just says I'm 15%, because actually in my forms when new clients fill them out, it asks me your body weight, your height, all these things. But what it says is body fat percentage. If unknown, say unknown, but if known, how did you measure that? And then if it says like bioimpedance, or it says all these things, I actually disregard it.
Hmm.
If it said DEXA scan, I don't disregard it, but I ask for the DEXA scan. And because I want to know when was it done? Was it, 2019 or was it like last month? Um, and if I don't have an accurate body composition measurement that I trust, I would just use one of those equations that are very popular and very decent at ballparking things to determine that. But say I got this and I have this client. She's 18% body fat. Let's say it was DEXA. She's 127 pounds. And the goal is to drop 3%. From there, I'm going to calculate her caloric needs. Um, so I went ahead and did this ahead of time. And based on 127 pounds, 18%, her lean body mass is around 104. So 104 pounds of lean body mass is my multiplier basically now to assess things. It doesn't really matter to me what equations people use to determine caloric needs. Some people use journaling. I don't trust people's journals, so I typically don't until I've been working with them long enough. I literally use their body and their body composition to determine this. And I use the Catch McCardle formula. So I'm not going to go into the equation, but essentially I take the lean body mass, multiply it through that formula, and I'll get a basal metabolic rate. There's lots of equations you can use to determine your basal metabolic rate. But that's the one I use if I have an accurate body composition measurement, because that's the one in the literature that seemingly is the most accurate. So that's the one I'll use. So if I have 104 pounds of lean body mass, I run it through the Catch McCardle. Her BMR is going to be 1389. So essentially, 1400 calories is her basal metabolic rate. And essentially, that's her calories needed to just maintain while she's not doing anything but lying around. So, right off the bat, you can imagine there's a lot of females that don't even eat that before they even factor into their exercise and their job. Um, so I think that's very important. You have to set the stage early, and you want to get a foundation, as strong of a foundation as you can from the beginning. So if you're starting fresh, now's the time to really push it and see. If it's 1389, let's round it up to 14 or 1500 calories, because we don't want to be in a deficit right off the bat if we're trying to establish a baseline maintenance. But assuming that everything checks out, after I have her basal metabolic rate calculated, I run it through a physical activity level multiplier, which is very common. You can find them in all sorts of resources. I like this book, the Advanced Nutrition Human Metabolism book, and they use maybe 4 or 5 different multipliers for physical activity level, and it's anywhere from 1 to 1.2. So for this example, let's just shoot the middle. It's the 1.1. So again, I went ahead and did this ahead of time. So if I've got 1389 as a BMR, I'm multiplying it by 1.1. Again, that's a factor of her lifestyle. If she's a nurse, it's going to be higher. If she's a secretary, it's going to be lower, but we have to ballpark it. And then from there, you got to add the thermic effect of food, which more protein, higher thermic effective food. The thermic effective food can be anywhere from 10 to 25%. So you add that on top of that. When I work with females, again, it's contextual, but you get a feel for this from the beginning. If I have a female that I'm sensing, or she's literally telling me that body fat accrual or the amount of body fat she currently has is very, very problematic to the point of threatening compliance, I'll err on the side of caution where, if anything, I'd put you in a slight deficit before I put you in a slight surplus, just because I don't want to threaten compliance right from the get-go. So I typically would take that TEF, and usually I use the lower end of it, especially with women, because the amount of calories and the amount of protein they're going to be eating is not going to be excessive. So I don't need to go to 20 or 25% from a TEF point of view. So I got 1389, physical activity level of 1.1, TEF of 10%, her total daily energy expenditure before we factored into whatever training we may or may not be doing is around 1681. So say 1700 calories. So 1,700 calories is essentially maintenance for this person, assuming that the PAL, which I pegged at 1.1, met her lifestyle in terms of the job. But obviously, we would know that and could be a little bit more accurate. And then from there, we have to look at the goal. The goal is to lose 3%. We have to now create some sort of training or nutritional protocol or combination of both that starts to create an energy deficit.
How long would it take to lose 3%?
Well, you can lose 3% in the matter of a few weeks with crazy drug use. You could spend 8 to 10 weeks taking your time and losing it. It also would depend on how lean you currently are. If you're obese, you can lose it very quickly. If you're not, not so much. An 18% female is very, very lean. Without the context of this case example or this case study, there might be a lot of little niche things that need to be considered because 18% is already very, very lean. And 15% is extraordinary lean and probably not for sure, but probably not sustainable all year round without some sort of supplemental needs. It would be contextual though. But I wouldn't expect to see too many females living at 15% all year round without using something.
Yeah, even at 18, would you do some kind of like a checkup with their menstrual cycle and stuff like that? And would you
100%.
also consider if they do DEXA scan to make sure when you follow up on that follow-up reading at the end, would you advise them to take notice of their bone density?
100%. And that would be something right from the get-go before we even design anything would be those considerations, the menstrual cycle for sure. The menstrual cycle, quite a few questions about the menstrual cycle is in my assessment forms because right off the bat, that's an indicator. Because if somebody is, you know, theoretically in their healthy reproductive years and they're dealing with hormonal disruptions or amenorrhea, there's an issue already to deal with. That's not the place I'd want to start an energy deficit when somebody is not even regularly menstruating yet, when theoretically they should. Now, blood work could reveal that, hey, this is just the way you are, okay. But right off the get-go, if somebody says, yeah, my periods right now is irregular, the last thing I want to do is start dieting right off the bat. When I say dieting, I mean like an energy deficit, because that is quite possibly the reason that the hormones of the menstrual cycle is irregular. So that's definitely something that I would factor in for sure. Yeah.
So what about nutrition? How do you break down your macros, your calories? Is mealtime an essential, or what's happening there?
Yeah, good question. Before I drop into the macros, I'm not quite done with the calorie needs for this person because if the goal is to go from 18% to 15 or whatever, 20 to 17, um, what their end goal looks like factors in. If they want to look like the bikini fitness model thing, we have to have some strength training happening. We may or may not need some aerobic activity happening. So we have to calculate the energy needs for the activities that we're going to be programming. So if I said, okay, we're going to strength train 4 days a week, we have to calculate what that's going to burn. That's going to burn another 800 to 1,000 calories a week, which is not anywhere near what people think. You don't burn a lot of calories lifting weights. So by the time you factored in your energy expenditure, which should be very specific to the activity you're doing, the PAL is your lifestyle, including your job, in my opinion. The resistance training or the energy expenditure calculations, those are specific to your task. Because if I have a female dancer versus a female shot putter versus a sedentary female that doesn't even exercise, like maybe she does yoga or something like that, those are very different caloric needs. So you got to get as accurate as you can with the type of energy expenditure you're going to be programming in. And so then from there, calculated resistance training only, we're going to add another 800 or so calories to this case study's weekly output. Now her total daily energy expenditure is around 1,800 calories. So by the time we factored in 4 strength training sessions, again, the duration and the type of training could factor into how you're doing this. But we're going to do strength training for 4 or 5 exercises 4 or 5 times a week. We need around 1,800 calories to quote unquote maintain that 18%. So before anything has to happen, we need to have at least that going in. And then from there, then we start to get specific. Now, when you're talking about the macro breakdown, I think it's very important that you're always prioritizing protein. Like everybody knows, protein is priority. If you're using exogenous hormones or any kind of PED that improves muscular hypertrophy, the need for protein doesn't go away, but it can be slightly diminished. So you've got a pretty broad spectrum of protein ranges. I would say anywhere from 1 to 1.4 times that lean body mass that we calculated. So that was 104. So her protein intake could be anywhere from 105 to 145, 150 grams per day. So you set that in stone. Where you go on that spectrum, that's very contextual. Age, insulin sensitivity, amount of muscle mass, type of train, all these things factor into that. But say you're in that spectrum, fats are going to be anywhere from a quarter to a half, a gram per quarter to half of your body weight. So if you're 127 pounds, you're going to be anywhere from 35 to 65 grams of fat total per day. I would try to divide your fat intake, your dietary fat intake across monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and saturated fats relatively evenly, like a third, and a third. If you're crushing a lot of exogenous hormones like anabolic steroids, the saturated fats might not want to get as high, but again, that's a health marker thing. If you use your protein intake from animal protein sources, which is ideal, that's almost auto-regulating your saturated fat intake without even thinking about it, because the fats associated with animal proteins are saturated largely. So you don't even have to think about that one. So now you've got a third of your fats gone from your protein source. You allocate the other 2/3 to mono and poly. Mono is going to come from your nuts and nut butters and seeds, and poly is going to come from ideally fatty fish or an essential fatty acid supplement. Once you've tackled those 2 things, what's left is carbs. So depending on what you use for your fat or protein intake, your carb allotment is anywhere from 156 to 260 grams per day. There's not a lot of female aesthetically driven bikini or fitness model girls eating 156 grams of carbs. And that to me is the bare bones minimum for this case study. Anything lower than that is really going to start to have impacts on certain things that you need to be aware of and measure, like thyroid function, conversion from T4 to T3, the type of train you're doing, etc. So when I have those macros set up, that's the daily. From there, you asked about timing. Timing of the macros is going to come down, or the food is going to come down to me largely to the type of train that we're doing. If this is like the case study is asking for a fitness model, that type of training is about as easy as it gets. Aesthetic training is about as easy as it gets. It's literally like bodybuilding training. You don't have to worry too much about nutrient distribution across certain times via meals. It's more about the net totals. But what I would pay attention to is compliance. So if her schedule or this person's schedule allows for 2 meals a day or 6 meals a day or whatever, I would be basing it around her schedule to ensure that at least the totals are being, accomplished. And then from there, if we can fine tune it, sure, we will. But I wouldn't start off with something so specific and meticulous that it's a struggle for them to do. because the best way to get results is to be able to consistently do the same things that are giving you progress. So I would just set the macro distribution on my assessment forms. I ask, how many meals per day do you typically eat? And they'll answer. And if it says 4, I will try to divide those macros across that 4. If they say 1, I want to dig a little deeper and find out why. Maybe they're doing IF, like intermittent fasting, because they think that's superior, or they were told that's superior. I'd probably want to change that. But again, it would depend on their answer. But essentially, you're going to divide those macros across the amount of meals you're eating per day. And then from there, it's a matter of fine tuning based on a whole wad of, specific details, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. So you kind of answered a lot of questions that I wanted to ask. And like to me personally, the uphill battle is usually how the hell do you get them to eat 1,800 calories? Because they just get, even after seeing results that their physique improves, they're still afraid. I'm eating
Yeah.
so much food, and I'm like, yeah, but you look much better. You're much leaner. You're much stronger. Yeah, but it's so much food. But it works.
Right.
I just don't understand what's the issue. Like,
Yeah.
generally, it's an uphill battle. I have it all the time. Like, I've had girls eating 3,000 calories, and they're
Mm-hmm.
barely like 127 pounds.
Yeah.
And that's what they need because they train really hard. So meal timing for you is not as important as the total calories as far as I understand that. Is there a
Well, that's
difference
based
between,
on that's based on this specific goal, which is more an aesthetic only type of thing and a
right?
sustainable look. So a sustainable look to me means consistency is very important. And then the type of train they need to be doing for this goal doesn't require specific nutritional interventions based on like pre-post, peri workout windows, stuff like that. You can, and I would slowly tweak it if we can keep compliance high, but I probably wouldn't start out right away with that way because it's not going to make that big of a difference. If you eat carbs before you train or after you train or during your training, you're still going to be able to do, 4 sets of hip thrusts. Like it's not going to change what you can do that well. Now, if you had to go run a marathon race or fight, 5 rounds, something like that, that's totally different. But for this specific case, I would nail the daily totals first, and I would try to nail the daily totals in a consistent manner. So if you always eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, then that's what we're shooting for: breakfast, lunch, dinner. If you only ever eat lunch or only ever eat dinner, or whatever you're doing, again, depending on why that was the case, I might want to intervene a little bit. But essentially, I don't want to disrupt your lifestyle too much. I want to design the protocols to suit the lifestyle so compliance stays as high as theoretically possible.
Sounds like you're fighting the same battles that I do. Is like stop
Yeah, for sure.
stacking on stuff that is just have a structure to your plans and stick with
Yeah.
it. So what about, are there any supplements that you would suggest somebody who's in calorie deficit to, well, first of all, a lot of people not going to think this is calorie deficit, but it is. Is there like a multivitamin or maybe amino acids or maybe some kind of micronutrients, maybe something for thyroid and whatnot? Uh, Somebody just recently asked me about Celtic salt, and I'm like, let's be honest, the amount of salt you're using is not going to make any difference about micronutrients anyway. But is there anything that you think is important? Like we know both that a lot of people who stopped using sodium, salt, table salt, they might end up being deficient in iodine because that's what they add to table salt. So what's in your kind of shelf that would be good to have? Like I usually prescribe, hey, have these things. You might necessarily not use them, but it's good to have them at home. What is there any kind of supplement that you would suggest to have at home just in case?
So this, whatever it was, 1,800 calories, this theoretically is still not a quote unquote deficit. It's a theoretical maintenance level. Now, the way this case study was sort of pushed, it's to get from 18% to 15% and sustain it. With that goal, I probably wouldn't put them in an energy deficit. I would probably leave them where this calculated maintenance which is never a thing. It's a dynamic target. But where this calculated numbers came out, I'd probably leave them there and let the strength training increase lean contractile tissue, which by default would give me a deficit over time. And they could probably get to that 15% level relatively quickly with zero struggle. And we're not even in a quote unquote deficit yet. And that would be a sustainable thing because literally they didn't really have to sacrifice anything, assuming, they weren't eating ridiculously prior. From there, from a supplement point of view, I've never had one single supplement that I recommend to people every time. It's never happened. The most common one I've recommended or suggest people take has been an essential fatty acid supplement of some sort, and sometimes some sort of vitamin D support. There's been quite a few cases where I didn't need those things, but where I live, that's the more common things. But from there, it's going to be more so based on what those original blood markers look like when we did the health check, any type of symptoms or issues they're talking or possibly complaining about. But I would say a good bang for your buck to have on hand, whether you need it right away or not, or at all, would be an essential fatty acid. Because if you're not a fan of eating fattier fish like salmon, mackerel, trout, red tuna, anchovy, you're not going to likely have enough of the EPA, DHA. We need that. We need 2 or 3 grams of that per day on average. So an EFA supplement is good, possibly a vitamin D type of supplement. And honestly, creatine monohydrate is something that I think would be good to have on hand. And then from there, it would be a matter of context.
Yeah, these are interesting ones. Some people are still afraid of creatine, especially. I had a conversation with somebody who said like, yeah, but it causes kidney stuff. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. And this person gave me an example. Yeah, I worked with Marines and they suffered like negative consequences. But let's be honest, they can suffer negative consequences from anything because their training is just horrendous. They're all constantly dehydrated. They're constantly under too much stress. You throw anything at them, it's going to cause even more stress. So let me break it down to what you've just described. If somebody wants to be like moving into that definition, shaped bodies that you can start seeing separations between different muscles, maybe your back is standing out a bit more detailed, your glutes are popping out, and you can see your hamstrings and those kind of things, that you need to be extremely patient. You need to have a clear understanding about where you're starting. Just nibbling on food and eating as and where and trying to starve yourself is not going to give you those results. More often than not, you're just going to run into health issues.
Yeah, you need to build muscle. You're not going to build muscle with no anabolic raw materials from your food.
Right. And being precise with your nutrition seems like the most important part from what I hear is like, just be consistent instead of jumping all over the place, right? Yeah. Is there anything else you feel like, because this sounds extremely simple and we both know that people just don't follow it because it is so damn simple.
Yeah, there's lots more we can continue to dive into for sure.
Yeah, so on one-to-one basis, there is definitely a lot of things like people will respond to different things differently, and food might affect you different. You might go into really like a minute details, like you described. Somebody doesn't like fatty fish. I have people like that, and there's always a struggle and like finding the way around it, and so on and so forth. But essentially, the most important part that people need to understand who want to get leaner is do your resistance training. Make sure you understand where you're going and understand that your habits have to change. Otherwise, you're not moving anywhere. Awesome, Scott. I'm mindful of your time. I'm going to let you off now. And on next week, we're going to dig deeper in all of these and explore more things that people can do to get results quicker.
Okay, yeah, sure. That sounds great.
We'll be right back.